Our next guest is Katherine Wynter. You can check out her website at katherinewynter.com, and that's Wynter. Well, I hope I pronounced that right, unless it's Wynter. We'll find out in a second. It's Katherine, WYNTR.com. Katherine fell in love with the horror and fantasy genres at a very young age, hiding in libraries wherever she had the chance and reading until they made her leave, unusually by throwing her book out the door, so she was forced to follow. When she was old enough for an allowance, she spent it exclusively at bookstores and began building her own library, which has grown and has been donated only to grow again like the bookish, vestigial tale. Although she once planned a career in genetic engineering so she could create her own time-traveling dragon, she abandoned this profession when it became clear that sometimes the best science only lives in the imagination of her readers. Without any further delay, let's go ahead and get her on the line. Katherine, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have you here. Sorry, I brought my wrong reading glasses. I'm having a heck of a time looking at my notes. And I caught a few words off. Anyway, thank you so much for giving up some time on a Saturday night to join us.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, I'm really excited to be here with you today.
So you are a writer, an author?
Uh-huh. I write horror and fantasy.
Well, cool. We're going to talk a lot about that. How did you get into writing, Katherine? How did it all start for you? Obviously, you were into books at a young age, and that's definitely a change from today's youth. It's unless it's Facebook or Twitter or text, and the kids of today just don't want to do that.
I don't know. I still meet a lot of young readers out there.
Do you?
I went and met with a zombie group at a local high school here in Cincinnati, and I was really amazed at how many different kids came out who like to read zombie and like to read horror fiction. So I think there's still some hope out there that we'll have more readers.
And I guess that's true because the Comic-Con thing in all these different cons and shows and stuff that are bringing these characters from the days of the comic books to life, and the zombie, with Walking Dead and all this other stuff, all the zombie movies and the zombie apocalypse, if you will, that has sure stirred quite a bit of interest in those subjects.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right. A lot of people say, TV sucks people's minds away. We just get mindless watching it. But I don't agree with that. I think a lot of these shows about, The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones or other series that get made are actually helping more people to read and giving more people a pathway into reading.
Well, that's true. Well, and maybe that is a good thing because I guess it just seemed for such a long time, and again, maybe I'm not being as open-minded as I usually am. It just seemed for a long time, not that many years ago, it was hard to get kids to read books, and maybe it was because the subjects that interest them weren't there. Or they were there, but it was just not the big section. I know now in the libraries, the fantasy books and stuff are starting to. They're starting to grow. There's a lot more to offer, and I guess my opening statement was that probably wasn't fair, but not that many years ago, there was just a lot of stuff that did not. It didn't interest. I think it just didn't interest the younger people. But now through social networking and and the Comic-Cons and stuff like that, because the spectrum is so immense, it's given young people something. It's given them a reason to pick up a book and read, which is good.
Yeah, and it's given them a way to interact with books that they never had before. When I was growing up hiding in libraries and reading, I never dreamed of trying to contact an author or dress up like a favorite character. Maybe Halloween, that might have been it. But now, I could go to Comic-Con dressed up like my favorite character and have other people recognize me and, have a discussion about the books. And it's, given a new kind of life out there for the fans, I think, a way for them to connect.
So how did you get into horror and fantasy, right? How did it start for you?
For me, the first thing I got into reading was horror. So I think my first novel being horror just kind of stemmed from that. I was reading Stephen King, Dean Koontz, and all of them at about age 10, 11, 12. And so I was kind of got into writing it that way. It was my first love of my first genre that I loved. And so I think it became natural to want to write in it.
Did it, the one thing I think that, like, horror in years past, it was pretty scary for kids. Now the kids of today aren't quite as scared of those subjects. Maybe because, again, there's more of an influx of it. There's more people talking up. You know what I mean? There's more of the horror cons and fantasy cons. Now it's kind of interesting reading to see who can get the most grotesque, I guess, if you will. But way back when, I mean, when I was a kid. I mean, some of these books that are out today, I'd be terrified to read.
Yeah, I agree completely. Some of them get a little gory. I think good horror doesn't have to be unnecessarily gory.
Right.
Sure, a lot of them have some violence in it, but the really, really creepy stuff and the really scary stuff happens because it relates, I think, in some level to our real experiences in life. We hear those sounds down the hall, and then we read the book, about the ghost moving things. And it connects together because, it has that real-life kind of frame of reference.
Gotcha. Let's talk about some of your books that you've written. What is the late? You've written several books. What's the latest thing that has come out for you?
The latest to come out for me is Awakening, The Keeper Chronicles, Book 1. It's an urban fantasy, which means it's set in more of a modern time.
Okay.
It's my attempt to, I like writing monster stories, and I love monsters in Greek mythology, and I thought, well, I want to come up with, not your standard vampire kind of monster, but I wanted to really come up with a monster that I thought could actually exist. And so I looked through Greek mythology for inspiration, and I always loved, I don't know if you watched, like, the Hercules or Xena shows.
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely.
Growing up, and all of the different kind of monsters that they used to fight, like the Hydra,
right,
and things that seem really kind of crazy, centaurs, stuff like that. But I thought, well, what if they really existed? Could I come up with a plausible explanation for them? Not only them having been such a prevalent part of history, but also their kind of disappearance into the modern age. And so I used that as the basis of the mythology behind the series.
So when you write your books, do you? And I want to talk about some of your different books, but do you write them do you start off as like a series? I mean, do you when you begin to write, like with The Keeper, with Awakening, is this going to be a series of books where it introduces the characters and will take them through quite a few generations and quite a few different books?
Yeah, I usually do think in series, and I usually like to write them. Probably because I read so many of them growing up. And it's once you get to know a character, it's hard to let them go. You want to kind of see how they change, through different events.
Well, one thing like you were mentioning about when you were doing research for your book, I think one thing that is fun, and I think it's good especially for young people, if you're trying to, I mean, even if the book if it's strictly fiction, but you're trying to introduce real elements into it, I think there's a lot of, it's interesting and fun from my perspective to dig back into history. Like you talk about the monsters of back then. Well, I'm not saying that they were really there or they weren't there, but there was so many different things that pointed to back in those days and in history books, things that couldn't really be defined, and they were more than folklore. I mean, in tales, they were things that those people in those time periods believed really existed.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, we see it in the artwork, we see it in the stories that survive, all of these different elements and these different kind of beasts and like combinations of beasts and things like that. But, if you see it so many different places, it's a wonder, somebody had to have thought of it.
Gotcha.
Is there a grain of truth behind it.
So as a writer, there's a lot of people that are out there. I've actually got a couple of books. They have not gone to. I'm just going to use the Amazon type publishing. What do you suggest for people that have a desire to write? What are some of your tips? What are some of the things that you do as far as an author? What are some of the things that drive you, and maybe some things you could tell our listeners about that help you out, and if they have a desire to write their own books, how they, maybe some things to consider to go about doing it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think for me the most important thing to do as a writer is to write. Mm-hmm. I try to maintain a really steady writing practice where at least for a half hour every day I sit down and write something, whether it's part of a book I'm working on or a poem or something else, just for fun. Getting in that habit and making it normal, every day to sit down at your desk and to do some writing is probably the most useful thing I can think of. Other than that, reading is very important. You can't be a good writer, I don't think, if you don't read what other people are writing.
Right. And
you don't know what else is out there.
And get some flavor and maybe not necessarily mimic them by any means, but at least enjoy some, be able to pull some of the things that they've used into your own work.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And doing some different analyses of the writing can be interesting, too. For example, when I was getting started writing, I kept thinking about, how long should a paragraph be? Right. And I have a master's in English, so I think about weird stuff like that. No. And so I took out some fantasy books that I liked, and I sat there and did a chapter of each. How many sentences were the paragraph? How many words were each sentence, roughly? And you'd be surprised what you can learn about the different lengths of sentences and lengths of paragraphs and how those affect the psychology, of the reader behind it. That was probably one of the most useful things I did when I started writing.
I think for me, the most difficult thing, Katherine, is the kind of when you're, like I said, I've got a couple of books done. They're fun, they're fiction, they're fun reads. I've just got to get myself in gear and get them published and out there. Because I wrote a series, pretty much penciled up a series of 3.
Okay.
But what I find that was the hardest thing was kind of how to try to determine the he said, she said, kind of trying to, when you introduce a handful of characters into a chapter, how to keep them all separate and let the reader read it and know who's speaking and talking. I found that to be the hardest thing.
Yeah, that can be a real challenge. I got hung up on that for a while, A lot of us, when we start writing, we want to use different phrases. We get tired of saying he said or she said all the time, and so we try to toss in something fancy. And I was actually told by one of my teachers, don't do it, that for the reader, he said and she said almost become invisible words. Right. They're there and they are acknowledged in the reader's mind, but they don't really see them and don't really read them. So even though you may have it 3 or 4 times on a page, your reader doesn't feel like it's a repetition. And using some of the other language, can actually distract them and pull them out of the dialogue, when you're having that conversation.
Well, again, it's trying to put the reader into the story, and almost you're reading it, but you're almost in your mind watching it like a movie.
Yeah, definitely.
I know for me, what I ended up doing with my first one was I tried to start from the beginning. I ended up starting from the middle, and I worked my way out to the end and out to the beginning. And what helped me out quite a bit was I actually storyboarded the story. I actually, nothing fancy, just started drawing it up on paper, and through that I was able to derive, chapters, and like I said, I still need to get it all put together, but I found it a very interesting exercise.
It is a good practice. There's kind of 2 ways to go about writing a novel, and one is pantsing it, having an overall concept, but just starting at the beginning and letting the story flow. And then the other way is, by storyboarding. And I know authors that will list every chapter and titles and what each character is doing in each chapter, and it helps give them a sense of the whole story.
Right. Well, again, we can all learn from each other, but you've
Yeah.
obviously got it down. I mean, you're well down the road. Let's talk about, well, again, you sent me some talking points. I'd like to cover a lot of different things with you, but Blackout is zombies. I notice you like zombies.
I love zombies. I think a lot of people do these days, but yeah, I just love them. They're so interesting. You know, I think we have such an obsession with life and death and living forever. You know, that this concept of a zombie and, you know, what happens to us after we die and all the various forms that it's taken, you know, throughout literature is very interesting. And so I tried to come up with, again, I like to try and make my monsters realistic. So I try to think, okay, if zombies were real, how would they happen? Like, could we get a real zombie? And you know the traditional, like, virus, you know, there's a virus that goes around.
Right.
I thought, I don't know. And so my zombies are actually normal people. You know, I set this story in the future where a scientist tried to learn how to live forever. And he used nanocells, basically. So when you die, you get injected with nanocells, which then copy and duplicate every cell in your body, and they kill off the original.
Okay.
And then after a few minutes, you wake up, and you're you again, but with this half machine, half organic body that looks like you, but you don't need to eat, and you don't need to drink, and you really don't need to breathe. None of those functions are necessary anymore. All you need to sustain your life is more injections of nanocells. Because, you know, everything eventually gets destroyed, but as long as you get new cells, you're fine. The programmer, though, thought, well, I want to program this computer. You know, the whole point is to live forever. So people are programmed that if they run too low on their nanocells, the computer will shut off their consciousness. And then they will go and attack anybody around and basically eat them, you know, like a zombie, to try and get more nanocells until you get enough and your consciousness kicks back in. And you might wake up and find you have someone's arm in your mouth or leg, you know, and feel really bad about it.
Interesting. So it's kind of, so the book kind of sets the scene for what happens, and maybe also we get into the lives of these people who have passed away and are now existing as a zombie.
Yeah, so the real story is about the first zombie that was created. You know, the first guy to have gone through this and what his life has been like. And he gets targeted by a terrorist group that think this whole process is unnatural and, you know, we shouldn't allow it to continue. And so it really isn't so much a zombie story, although there are zombie scenes in it. It's really the story of this attack and what this guy is going through, trying to find, you know, a normal life and be a normal person.
Gotcha. You know, one thing, like, I don't know if anybody's ever taken it from this approach, but, you know, I kind of believe that there is, I mean, you know, when we think about zombies right away, I think we kind of look at The Walking Dead. You know, the person dies.
Yeah.
They still haven't really figured out what causes them to reanimate or come back. But I sometimes look at zombies as people that maybe haven't died and have come back to life, but maybe through a virus or through an injection or whatever, we kind of maybe lose consciousness, and that zombie comes, if you will, the zombie comes, maybe not wanting to eat people or other humans, but if you lost all sense of reality, if you will, you know, where it's just about your survival, that most people would do just about anything to survive. It's about the preservation of, like in your book, the preservation of the consciousness, but is just the preservation of the life of that creature or human to continue to go on at any cost.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. You know, it's one of our primal instincts, I think, is that urge to live and to survive. You know, there have been survivor stories of all kinds, you know, where people have had to eat other people and do, you know, things we normally would never think about doing, but because it's for survival, you know, it suddenly becomes necessary.
Right. Yeah, and just like I don't know if you ever had the chance. I read the book years ago. There's been a couple of movies out about that the soccer team that went down in the Andes. The book called
Yeah.
Alive,
Mhm.
where they got to a point where they had to survive, and that was more of not a zombie thing, but more of a survival thing. But when you're hungry enough, when you're thirsty enough, you'll do just about anything.
Yeah, I agree. I saw the movie version of that one, I think.
Yeah.
And it was the dilemma, should I eat or not, was very interesting.
With your books, Katherine, like with Blackout, have you ever given some thought to taking that somewhere? And do you want to stay? Do you want to continue to write, or have you ever thought about? Because that sounds interesting. Have you ever thought about bringing Blackout to try to bring it to the big screen, or bring it to a movie of sorts?
I have thought about it. Yeah, because I really think it would make a fun movie. Screenwriting, though, is just not something I've practiced very much.
Something a little bit different than writing a book, then.
Yeah, it's a whole different setup, and it's a whole different kind of language. But it's something I've been thinking about doing for Blackout. Trying to write up a screenplay and see if I could pitch it.
Well, again, right now there's, I did see, I've been a big fan of Walking Dead. I didn't realize, again, kind of digging into the historical side of things, I never realized that Walking Dead was based on a comic book. And at the last Comic-Con we had here in Salt Lake, I actually picked up some of the comic books. And boy, the comic books were even scarier than the series as far as grotesqueness and I never realized that was that the book is actually what made up the series. But from your perspective, with your zombie with Blackout, you're kind of coming at it from a different perspective versus a Walking Dead or like a World War Z.
Mhm. Yeah, it would make, I think, more like an action movie, really. With elements of horror than more of a straight up horror. Movie.
Exactly. In your talking points, paranormal. I saw that word in there. I circled it. You're a big believer in paranormal stuff, and you talk about your brother. Tell me about that. What does paranormal experiences or being around people that have, or I should say, having the desire to find out more about paranormal, has that driven some of your writing?
Oh yeah, it's definitely driven a lot of my writing. I think it's kind of silly to think that the world only exists of things that we can see and experience with our senses. Dogs can see colors we can't see. They can hear sounds we can't see.
Right.
I fully believe there's a ton of things out there that, a lot of us can't have the senses to see, but other people do. For example, my brother, we were just eating dinner one day. I was about 18, and he just brings up in conversation, he's like, yeah, I used to have this dream all the time where I saw a man with dark hair, and he was in our living room, and he put a noose around his neck and hung himself from the rafters, and he would stare at me, in my dreams all the time. And my mom kind of turned white, and she looks at us, and she says, well, a man fitting that description actually killed himself in our house,
wow.
That way before we bought it.
Interesting.
It was one of those, like, goose hair, goosebump raising moments. I think maybe my brother has got the sensitivity in the family.
So was it something that he was this something he saw several times, or was this something that reoccurred to him, or was it just a one-time deal?
He said it was a reoccurring thing. He claimed he used to talk to the guy, even. Wow. Back when he was, I think, around 6 or 7 when it happened. He only told us years later, because I guess he didn't attribute it to anything at the time when he was little.
Right. Well, and and that's the one thing that I've often said. I think that people, again, are becoming more open-minded to those type of things. Kind of the old story of, the kids and their imaginary friends. And I start to
Yeah.
believe that in a lot of cases, maybe those friends aren't so imaginary. People, I think, are becoming more open-minded. They're, not that many years ago, if you started talking about stuff like that, or even some of the subjects we cover on this radio program, you're crazy, you're a wacko. You're talking about stuff that's just craziness. And I think a lot of kids were stifled, where the parents wouldn't let them talk about we don't talk about those kind of subjects. And I think that today, more and more people are being, open, and they're more willing to talk about that, because I believe these young children are seeing things. They don't get, I don't want to say we're all programmed, but we kind of get desensitized as we get a little bit older. And when you're young and innocent, you do see things that others don't.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, if you think about how the mind works, it's programmed to make us act and think like we believe we should. And so when you get told so many times that, oh, ghosts aren't real, this doesn't exist, eventually you'll come to believe it, and you'll stop experiencing these things. But when we're young and we don't have that kind of social conditioning yet, I think that's what allows younger kids to be more open to these experiences. I think it would be great if we could maintain that through as adults.
Right, exactly. Have you ever thought about writing books on the paranormal, or is that, again, do you want to stay more with the fantasy stuff?
I do like the fantasy stuff more, but I have some paranormal elements to Awakening. I have there's, in addition to the demons and the people that hunt the demons, we use witchcraft, and there's a scene in the book where one of the witches raises kind of a ghost of somebody that had died, and it replays a little scene that had happened, a few days before.
Mm-hmm. But again, they're more. But the books again are more fantasy and fiction then.
Yeah, a little more fantasy and fiction.
What do you do? I mean, do you sit down as far as I know one thing you said you always love reading horror and thinking up ways to scare people. Have you thought about creating some of your own creatures and characters, or you try to? I think it'd be a lot of fun again, because I enjoy old horror movies and stuff like that. I mean, the old ones to me now have a very fun element. Although when I was a kid, watching Creature Feature and stuff back in the 60s and 70s, I mean, that stuff scared the heck out of me back then. Now,
me too. Yeah.
I mean, now it's more everything. I think now what the filmmakers try to do is use more gore and grotesqueness to scare the audience than actual. I think about the old Bela Lugosi movies in Frankenstein. You never saw Frankenstein tear a person apart. He just grabbed him by the neck and they walked through the curtain, and that was it. And it was more of the theater of the mind after you saw that scene.
Mm-hmm.
But the horror movies of today, again, are just, as I've said many times, when the alien tears you apart, now people want to see what you had for dinner. And you know what I mean? They just can't get it gross enough.
Yeah, that's actually a turnoff for me in a lot of modern horror movies. If it looks really really gross and really gory, I just can't watch them anymore. I like you said, the old classics, where you have the big scary monsters, and like Freddy Krueger was super scary.
Right.
Watching that gave me nightmares for weeks.
Well, yeah, especially some sort of character that could, I think, again, and that kind of goes back to, the character that can come into your bedroom and get you in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and it's again relating, the scene to something realistic, something we experience, and so it makes it extra scary to think, hey, I'm laying here in my bed reading this, and or watching this on TV, and this is what this person's doing. Maybe I should look out my window.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio tonight. Our guest for hour 2 is author, fantasy and horror author Katherine Wynter. Again, Katherine, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Well, thank you so much, Pat. It's been a lot of fun.
What books do you have on the burner? What's the future for you? Do you have a whole list of subjects or a whole list of ones that you'd like to get through? I know most writers, it seems like right away when they get done with one, they get on to the next one. What's your future? What are your plans for the future that you can share?
Well, I have another book coming out at the end of the month. It's a more traditional fantasy. It's called Reaper Legacy: Hunt for the Lost Raven,
Okay.
and it's set in a world that I got to create with floating islands, and there's sky pirates and a lot of action. And so after that one comes out, what I've really turned my attention to is writing the next book, kind of for each of the series. So I'm also almost finished with the sequel for Blackout, which I'm very excited about. And then I'll probably do the next book for Keeper Chronicles and go from there.
Interesting. Are you going to continue to, like with Blackout, are you going to continue to just keep putting books out and just keep bringing new characters in and killing some of them off?
Haven't killed anybody off so far. I don't quite have the knack of killing all my main characters, although someone does die in the sequel. But so far I have a trilogy planned for each of them. And that's kind of how the ideas came to me, was in a set of 3 books. So I'm going to do those and then kind of see from there if there's any more ideas or any interest in doing further books in those series. If not, I'll turn to something else. I've got another 4 or 5 ideas kind of rattling around the back of my head.
Gotcha. Now, do you do? I was looking at your website. Okay, a couple things. First of all, where can our listeners get your books from? Where's the best place to get them?
The best place is Amazon.
Okay.
The ebooks are there, and they're usually cheaper. The ebook for Blackout is $1.50, and for Awakening, it's $2.99.
Okay.
And then the print books you can also order right from Amazon. That's the easiest place.
Gotcha.
I do have some links on my website as well.
For different places for people to get the books.
Yeah, Amazon is really kind of the big one to go to for writing these days. You can find Blackout also on Barnes & Noble if you like using that Nook system instead.
Amazon is, it's above and beyond books. You could find just about anything on Amazon. I think it's like as big as eBay.
Yeah,
It's
I
huge.
agree. And it's changed the whole writing industry, now. Instead of having to get one of the big publishers, lots of smaller publishers can now get their books out.
Well, for me, I work with a lot of different publishing companies to get different guests on the program over the years, but for me, I'm just going to self-publish through their I actually have, I've had several guests on the show that have self-published, and it's amazing how quickly you can get a book out there. And even as far as editing and stuff, you don't have to do nothing fancy. I mean, there's tools out there that are very affordable to use on their site. I encourage anyone who wants to do a book, if you don't want to go through the rigmarole of a publisher and spend a little bit of money and time, you can get yourself a book out there pretty quick.
Oh yeah, I've actually been thinking of doing some of my own. I have a kids fantasy book that I wrote that I've been thinking about self-publishing on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Well, you get them out there quick, and you don't have to worry about the publisher trying to pick it up. I mean, it's just something that you can make it happen.
Yeah, and it's something I would like. I would consider now that I've gotten a couple with some publishers. I think it helps to have some with both. I still enjoy the traditional publishing, and I've learned a lot from my editors and from the publishers and from the whole experience of trying to go out there and query different people and get them interested, in my books.
Now, do you, I was looking on your calendar, you do quite a few events too.
Yeah, I like going to different cons and conventions and doing signings and meeting readers and talking about books.
Yeah, I was. It was here in Salt Lake. Again, we had our first Comic-Con was a couple of years ago. I can't believe it. It seems like just yesterday. We actually have two of them per year. We have the same promoter puts on something in the spring they call the Fan X event, which took place in January this year. Usually it's in April, and then the Comic-Con event is actually it's Labor Day weekend is when they hold it. But what I found interesting was the first year it was more cosplay, role play stuff. They brought in a lot of big stars. But the past two events, quite a few of the aisles were full of not only fantasy artists but book authors. I mean, there was a lot compared to the first show. I was amazed. I mean, there was rows and rows of authors.
Yeah, they're a great place to go and spread the word about your books and to get to meet different readers. Most of them are really open to having authors, and they're very nice and very affordable.
Right. Well, and it's a good place. I mean, I believe all of them here, Fantasy X Fan X here in Salt Lake, they put 90,000 people through the door. That's a lot of people. If everybody would buy one of your books, you could do pretty good.
Heck, I'll take 1% of them buying a book.
Yeah,
That would sell out of my stock of what I have.
No, but I mean,
and it's about getting your name out there at first. Getting some recognition and getting to meet people.
Now, with your books, do you do are there illustrations? Do you work with an illustrator? You work with other artists for artwork in the book, or are they strictly just print type material at this time?
Right now, they're just print and type material. I am working on an artist for the kids' book because I wanted some illustrations in there, and I've been thinking about putting some more illustrations of different characters, and especially for Awakening, I have all these different monsters. I think it would be fun to have, some more drawings of them that I could put up on the website. So I am thinking of going that route.
Yeah, because that's what I've noticed is that the artists that come to Comic-Con, I mean, people that I never heard of before, but the work that they do is just amazing. I mean, the complexity of some of the artwork is just amazing, and the talent that these people have. And if you could join the two together, you'd really have something. But again, it's cool to see at these events that more and more authors are showing up, and hey, that's how you build your characters in your books. You never know what they could turn into.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are getting more interested in meeting authors and getting to know. I think to try new series and talking about books. Exactly.
Well, Katherine, I want to thank you for being here. The 50 minutes or 55 minutes went pretty doggone quick. I want to wish you the best of luck and when you go to these different events, and love to stay in touch and find out about some of your new books. And I hope the best for you, because I know it's hard to put this together, and a lot of work. People don't seem to realize what the amount of work is, but it sounds like you're well on your way, and I hope that one of your books, maybe one day I can say, hey, I interviewed that girl, and now looking at her, she's on the big screen.
Oh, that's the dream. That is the dream. I would love that. Thank you so much. I hope, your books go well, too, and that you get to publish them.
I just got to get off my butt and get them done.
That's the hard part. Like I said, try and write a little bit every day.
Trying to work,
find that they'll be done.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Life takes. I get enthralled and I get going for a little bit, and then I end up stopping, and that's where it usually lays. But I got to get it done. They're kind of penciled up now. I just got to get them a little bit more formalized and into something. And again, I'm doing it just for fun. I wanted to give it a try and say that I've done it. But again, your books, you've got a lot into them, and all I could say is I wish you the best of success, and love to stay in touch and find out when you got some new stuff coming out.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you.
Okay, my friend. Have a great weekend, and again, thank you for giving up your Saturday night for us.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye. Good night. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Katherine Wynter. Go check out her website at Katherine Wynter. That's WYNTR.com. A lot of interesting books on there. A lot of interesting stuff. The zombie thing really interests me. I don't know about everybody else, but I know Walking Dead kind of, I think, introduced a lot of us to zombies, and things have kind of spun off. I know at the Comic Cons, the biggest thing that you see is all the people dressed up as zombies, and hopefully through more books like Katherine's writing, we'll see different movies, different programs, different things come out.